dive into our next keynote speech. And this is going to be presented by a very regular and a most sought after speaker at the Pakistan Schools Conference, Dr. Mowadat Hussain Rana. So big hand to Dr. Rana. I'm sure we all have been waiting for that. Dr. Rana will be talking on the topic, are we wired differently now? So of course, the wired differently will cover the cognitive, neurological, and psychological challenges faced by the child of today while going through the pandemic. Dr. Rana, we would request you to please take on the stage, and then it's all yours. Thank you very much. A big round of applause for Dr. Rana. And while Dr. Saab is coming up, I must tell you that our online stream is being reached by 3,000 plus viewers, and we have 500 live streaming being done. So we are being watched. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I can assure you that you were watched earlier as well. So don't think that it's just started. What a pleasure it is to return to the Cambridge platform. For that, you would have to completely ignore my last qualification for obvious reasons. Okay, so just before coming here, I wasn't feeling great since last night. So I bumped into a student who said, "Can I join you?" Somehow recognized me, and I was sitting in the cafe, and he said, "Can I join you?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So I asked him, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm doing A levels." I said, "That's great, very nice, God sent." Can you tell me a little bit about how the COVID has affected you, influenced largely by the wonderful survey that was shared with me, done by the Cambridge team in Pakistan, which I thought was very illuminating to find out the ways that parents look at education, teachers look at education, and how students look at education. And here was another testimony this morning that was given by this young student from A levels. I wouldn't name the school. And he made this beautiful comment that that I thought I'd share. And let me tell you that I had heard this comment for the first time from a teacher of mine, Professor Bashir Late, may his soul rest in eternal peace. And now I heard it from a student. I said, "That's fantastic. There must be something right about this quote." So when to the response that how COVID has affected him, he said, "Do you really know the sound of rain?" I said, "No." "Does rain have a sound?" He said, I said, "No." He says, "But you always come to know it's raining. So if it doesn't have a sound, how do you know that it's raining outside?" So I said, "Because, rain falls on something. When it falls on something, it produces a noise. And that's how you come to know." He said, "Exactly that. That's how COVID has affected us. The sound of the rain is not really the sound of the rain. It is of what it has fallen upon." That I thought was very profound. So it's not COVID. It is who has experienced the COVID-19 phenomena over 2.5 years. It's the nature of that person, the type of that person who has experienced this. It's this family that has experienced it. The experiences are unique. So it is not that whatever I'm going to say is a generic statement that I'm giving about the neurological circuitry that has been changed probably forever by COVID-19, as the evidence suggests right now. But that people have been affected very differently and diversely by COVID-19. For once, he said that I think it was probably the best time of my life. I say, "What? The best time of life has been 2.5 years where everybody's cursing this time to go away." He said, "Yes, because for once I was not going to school. As long as I remember, I've been going to school. And I didn't have to go to school. That's beautiful," he said. He said, "For once, I was in charge of my life. And never before in my life I've been in charge of myself." So I could play my video games at whatever time I wanted to. I could extend them, uh, you know, just letting my mother know that I'm doing my homework and while I'm playing my video games. So I could get away with murders literally in these 2.5 years. So much that I could do, and I did. I'm a music buff. So here I was spending a lot of time with my music. I could hear anything for any length of time. I could stay awake at night, which was a luxury before that because my mother would come banging on the door. Soja kambakh jaldi se, kyun jaag raha hai? Sorry for the yup yup, but in a way, he was right. It has affected our students very differently depending upon their context in which they were. So I think that's one thing that in classrooms for all of us who are already back in the classrooms, they have to start to see individual students when it comes to how they have been affected, rather than have a generic understanding of how COVID has. And that is a bit of a disclaimer from all that I'm going to talk about. Please do not generalize the stuff that I'm going to talk about, because there'll be unique people sitting in your class who may not have experienced any of this that I'm about to describe to you. And for that, let me highlight to you that what would be my purpose of this talk. Why am I here? Well, for me, post-COVID, the role of schools need to be reviewed and looked at. Now, obviously, you're not going to do that just because I said it, but it's a wild thought, like many other wild thoughts that psychiatrists have. That you need to probably this is a time where you can step back and take a look analytically as to what has gone on and reflect deeply. And here is an opportunity, I think, for all of us to think deeply on the issue of how COVID-19 has affected education. And this has been a unique experience, that much granted. It has never happened before in our living memories. So this is a time to actually have a look at the post-COVID learning process slightly differently. First question that I'd like to answer is the new school or the school of the future there to provide learning or to remove barriers to learning? I'll tell you why in a minute. So that's one of the questions that do we have a renewed relevance or have we lost some relevance of schools as far as education is concerned? So that's another question that you can ponder upon. And then, if that is the case, do we have to redefine our role in the society as educational institutions? So those are some of the questions that I thought I'd pose to you and probably learn from you as well during the course of our discussion, subsequently, as well as in the question and answer session. Now, for that, I have a little quiz for you. There are absolutely no prizes here to guess who is the person on the right. So stop focusing there. So there is a prize, however, for letting me know who is this guy on the extreme left. So I'm blocking. Can you see his picture? Mughal King Humayun. That's not very far. Just one generation above. Well, you're skipping a whole generation there. And it extended for a while. Akbar. Akbar. Of course, this is not the picture of the Indian star who appeared as Akbar. So that is why I think you're confused. So neither was Jodha as good looking, I can assure you. So this is Akbar. And then, of course, do you recognize these guys? Not from far too distant the past. These are the new learners who were doing exactly this, what you see here, weren't they, for 2.5 years? So why I've shown you this picture is primarily to show you 3 different types of learners here. And one of the key information that I want to impart through this talk to you is to try and discover, is this the only way that humans have learned in history? or have there been other ways of learning? Now, you know that Buddha never went to any school, clearly, or at least we don't know about that school. He did not pass O levels, clearly, or A levels. And then one day he just left his home. So the only source of information or education in those times was home. And he left that. And yet the man was able to influence the future generations forever and more, in my opinion. There is nobody probably who has influenced human thought in its originality. I'm not talking about the actions and the constitutions that have come subsequently by wonderful people, but in terms of change of thought processes, he came up with some amazing philosophies. This is not the forum to talk about that. So he didn't have any institution to learn from. And the picture that I have not shown here for obvious reasons is that of Prophet Muhammad as well. Because you know that one of his names is Ummi. What is an Ummi? Not educated. Somebody who never went into any institution, he just went into a desert for in his formative years. So there are more examples that you can quote for me of people who never went to schools but have influenced history in an unforgettable way. They've left a mark. Uh, can we have the picture back? And then, of course, if you look at Akbar, this guy became a king when he was in not entered his teens even. He was 12 when he became a king. So who taught him? Well, Humayun, for once, as you know, was a great mathematician and astronomer, and that's how he died also, looking at the stars. He had taught his son a lot about mathematics, governance, etc. So his real teacher was his father. But then in the meantime, Humayun had collected a galaxy of experts and scholars from around the world, largely Persian speaking, and from the local dialect. The of Persian and the birth of Urdu had started that time. But a lot of people who actually understood Indian culture much more than the Afghani culture that they were representing, or the Central Asian culture that Babur, the grandfather, had brought to the subcontinent. So he wanted his son to know more about the soil that he was living on and was supposed to, from here on, rule. A lot of people in the Nauratans that he had represented India. And the entire Indian civilization was on their fingertips. So they started to educate this gentleman by just being around him. And then, of course, the people in the middle who are distant learners. So do you see the pattern here of learning? Three different types of learning processes. Is it making any sense? Okay, so this is what I'm going to establish during the course of our discussion about post-COVID-19 scenario. I'll find a relationship for you in this in a while. Bear with me. The first thing is that since Buddha, we now know a lot more about the learning processes. Initially on account of our knowledge of psychology. Psychology played a very important role, but it's gradually now giving way to neurological sciences and neurobiological patterns of understanding of learning. How does the brain work? And one of the key findings is, and this might surprise you, that if you leave alone the brain and you don't influence it at all, and you just let it experience the world, it will still learn. Because that's the only function that brain knows. Like the kidneys know only one thing, how to filter. Heart knows only one thing, how to beat, how to pump blood. Liver only knows how to metabolize. Brain only knows one function, that is to learn. So human brain naturally learns If you want a testimony to that, go and see Tarzan. Who was teaching him? The chimps. He learned and became the king of the jungle. It's a story, all right, but just to make the point that brain learns. Now, the neurobiological sciences of today have now shown us how does it do it. And if you know somehow how a function is performed by an organ, you can influence it far more precisely and specifically. So whereas the cognitive theory of learning, the constructivist theory of learning, all wonderful ways of looking at it, now you can actually go deeper, dig deeper, and actually learn the exact mini details of how a neuron actually learns. The fundamental cell of the brain, as you know, is the neuron. What happens to the neuron in the learning process? And since you know now the traces and the nanotraces and the messenger RNAs and the crab proteins, etc., that are involved, that I'll talk about in a minute, in the process of learning, you can actually influence one of these proteins the same way that you can influence an anxious brain by giving him or her the good old Lexotanil or Xanax. Some of you might have actually taken it this morning or last night. I was vying for it last night. So you can influence, therefore, the state of mind today, and therefore the learning processes as well. So times are not far away when you will actually have proteins available or substances available by which you can change the way a neuron learns. Accelerate it, decelerate it, alter it, change it, reboot it. And that is what the concept of machine-man interface is. This is a word that you're probably going to hear more and more if not already hearing it. That is where we are heading on account of our understanding of the neurobiology of the learning process of human brain. Now, let me give you a little glimpse into it by showing you the purpose of today's talk. Is this learning process something that can be influenced by the circumstances happening around an individual rather than inside the individual? Now, here's a paper that did not come after COVID-19, came about 10 years earlier. So you can see the phenomenon of epigenetics. Now, epigenetics is a phenomena which suggests that you can influence the genetics of an individual by operating on the environment in which an individual is living in. That's the epigenetic phenomenon. If there are biology teachers sitting here, they would bear with me on that. Look at the findings. So clearly, there is a case for COVID-19 changing the neurocircuitry and make us different, which is the title of my talk. If you accept this notion or understanding of the concept. Now, here's the second quiz for you. Your turn to be students. How does it feel being quizzed? Okay, a bit of empathy exercise for you. Okay, anybody from the hall who can tell me what, of course, the entire brain is ready to now learn, but what is the first organ of the or part of the brain that ignites or starts the learning process? Amygdala. Anybody? Sorry? Please shout. Cerebrum. Anybody from the back? So we have two candidates as yet, amygdala and cerebrum. The neurons, of course, absolutely, because that's the cell, but can we think of any other specific part of the brain that is the first to go? Frontal lobe. Sorry? Okay, let's wait for the answer, and you would know. I'm sure you would know it once it is flashed in front of you. But there is a very interesting part of the brain that's absolutely crucial. And the answer is coming in a moment. Now, here is a bit of a confusing slide for you. Now, if there is a psychiatrist in the world who doesn't confuse you, then he's not worth his salt. So, living to my reputation as a psychiatrist, I'm going to confuse you a little bit now through this very busy slide. But if I can convey the message, I think it'll really influence the way you would deal with your classes from here on. And that's the purpose of this slide, post-COVID. Now, which particular organ of the body appeared on the slide as the first to start the learning process? Eyes only see what the mind already knows. We completely forgot that the first word is anybody. What does RA stand for? Sorry? Reticular activating system. Reticular activating system. Well, well, it's still RAS in English. But I'll tell you in a minute what. It is the phenomenon in the brain by which it wakes up. So human brain refuses to learn if it is asleep. So the precondition for learning is a wakeful brain. What keeps you awake actually is the system. It's an awakening system of the body. Sometimes even nations need it. But at the human level, it's a reticular activating system of the brain. It certainly wakes you up. And the best stimulus that it is familiar to is auditory. So that's why people call your name if they want to wake you up. Mowadat, उठ जा कम वक्त, बहुत देर हो गई है, पराठा नहीं मिलेगा तुझे खाने. तो मैं उड़ गया तो एकदम, because I've heard my name. You would have waken up a number of times thinking somebody's called my name. Haven't you? So the most familiar thing is if you want to wake up a student in the class, what must you do? Call him by the name, which often you don't know. See, if you have a class in which you don't know the names of your students, I'm so sorry, you would find them without their RAS in your class. And the learning process will not take place. That's the first. The next, of course, is the movements in the joints. So if anybody has served in Navy, they would not ever put up any alarms. So they would ask you, sir, when can I give you a shake-up? That's the word in Navy, shake-up. So what the pan is going to do, he's going to come close to you and say, because you get used to the slight movement in the ship anyway, so he's going to shake you far more than the ship is shaking you already. You shake up, and that is when you wake up. Does it make sense? So these are the two ways in which moms actually wake you up. So there's a hint for you in the class as well. Go shake him up if you don't know the name. That's the other way of. Now, once the reticular activating system is in effect, the first thing that it then does is what you guessed, right? The cerebrum, the frontal cortex. And then from here, the whole learning process starts. And I want you to completely forget about the learning system here. Don't bother even. But just remember that there are three types of phenomena from here that drive learning. First amongst them is fear. अब अगर मैं ना उठा तो मार पड़ेगी, मुझे क्लास से बाहर निकाल देंगी मिस. I will fail the exam. Now, don't tell me this that children just study because they love studying. Well, one of the reasons why they actually study is because they have this fear of failure. Let's accept it. This is what the fact is, whether we like it or not, as psychologists and psychiatrists. Fear drives learning. Absolutely. Now, the problem with this fear, however, is that it is mediated through a hormone or a neurotransmitter at the same time, which actually gives you a type of learning to survive. It's a survival neurotransmitter, adrenaline. So the learning that you will have based on that kind of fear, the autonomic fear, is always going to be to make you live, survive odds, challenges and difficulties in life. So if you only teach students through this technique, you would be able to give them knowledge. But it will, in the meantime, negatively influence the acquisition of attitudes. You cannot teach attitudes to fearful people. Now you're sitting there in your seats very comfortably, easily. In the most sophisticated fashion, particularly if the photographer comes by, you will become a little more sophisticated. Right, thank you. Won't you? The bees se baithe na sare hum. Suppose there is a snake here. तो किधर होंगे आप? I can tell you where I would be. I'd be over here. And Abhidans could stare at me, सफेद रंग की सोफे के ऊपर खड़े हुए डॉक्टर साहब, इनको जरा इनका हाल देखो जरा, पढ़े लिखा आदमी है, जूते लेके खड़ा हो गया उसके ऊपर. The whole tamiz is going to go straight out of the window, wouldn't it? Because I'm fighting for my survival. My tamiz, my tehzeeb, my attitudes are best exhibited in moments of peace, tranquility, comfort, and in aesthetic settings. This is a message here. So what should, if you want to teach attitudes to students, what should be the setting like? That one? That way, that's important. To survive exams, to pass exams, that learning is going to take place. But don't expect that if your entire system of teaching is based on adrenaline-based mechanisms of learning, forget about the attitudes. Neurobiologically, it's not possible. Now, you want to teach attitudes. Well, then it's a completely different mediator. It's a completely different pathway. And that pathway is oxytocin-based. And oxytocin, ladies and gentlemen, is produced in human beings first when a mother starts to breastfeed a baby. Oxytocin is also called the milk letdown hormone. It is in sheer affection of her baby that she produces milk, and if she could, even honey. If she could. That is oxytocin. So the other process by which a child will learn now from day one onwards, including the process of suckling and surviving, would be through, it has to be oxytocin mediated. And another neurotransmitter that is involved in this phenomenon is nerve growth factor. This mediated learning, or based on oxytocin and nerve growth factor, is the traditional way of learning when you had, in particular in the subcontinent, the concept of peer and murid. You had the Sufi and those who lived around the Sufi. Sufi never took any classes. It is the phenomena that existed between Rumi and Shams Tabriz. Thank you very much. This is the phenomena that existed between Muhammad, may peace be upon him, and Ali alayhi salam. This is that osmotic learning the learning through the process of being together only. It's togetherness leading into a state of extreme respect and love and affection. That if I did anything wrong, it will offend my mehboob. See the important. This is ishqiya. This learning is ishqiya learning. It is based on a fear, but of a completely different type. What is this fear and how is this fear different from the other fear? इसमें है कि आप अपने महबूब को नाराज नहीं कर सकते. There is a fear in which you are constantly trying that if I do something silly or strange, it will offend my beloved. And this learning stays forever. If you wake me up and I'm in total utter dementia at 85 and shake me and ask me the name of my first love, I can assure you I'll tell you. But even if you today ask me, when is my marriage anniversary, I don't really remember. Although it took place right in this hall. Yes, it took place here. My marriage in Khurshid Mahal in Bari. Even then, I don't remember it truly because it's probably fear-based a little bit. So, see the difference between the two learnings? One forever and more, and one that is only going to come into play if you're under threat of failure or survival. It will come into play. That's important. But to change attitudes of people, transform them in terms of their personality and character, ladies and gentlemen, you would have to probably draw upon either this phenomenon or this phenomenon. Where you discover that there is a whole world inside you. And by the study of those systems inside you, you can learn everything around the world. The laws and regulations of physics and metaphysics that you would discover by reflecting inside at the level of the soul are those laws with which the universe is run. That's reflective learning. Why have I said all this? For you to use in classrooms. All the three types of students are there. What was he doing? Which type of learning? Which type of learning was Buddha doing? Reflective learning. Thank you very much. Which kind of learning was Akbar doing? Osmotic. He had these wonderful people around him who did not take him to a class, but he just saw them doing things specifically, and he was in deep awe of their stature. He loved his teachers so much that if he was to choose between his son and his teachers, he would choose his teacher. That osmotic learning that was taking place here put him in the throne for 51 years of his life. And to make him the greatest, one of the greatest rulers ever to rule India, Indian subcontinent. And then, of course, are these people. Why do you think they would learn so much from the internet? Because it's close to them. Why do they love a video game? Because it gives him unconditional affection and regard based on actions there and then. He doesn't have to wait for a result after 1 year. Let's learn something from the video game makers. Compare your processes of teaching with the video game process of teaching. How is he picking up so well? Because it's in proximity, he controls the learning process completely. He has this joystick, beautifully named, I must say. It brings joy and control, the two things that a student wants in life and are missing often in schools and homes is joy and control. The video games gives it to him, and he just cannot now move away from it. It's giving him joy, it is giving him control. So if there is a classroom that has no joy in it and absolutely no control in the students, as far as the learning process is concerned, this third technique is gone. Osmosis, I don't know. If you don't really know कि आज जिसने पढ़ाया वो कल आएगी भी कि नहीं, उसकी शादी हो गई तो वो नहीं आएगी. ठीक है. Buddhas are long gone. But if you can make your students try to relate what he has just learned in mathematics and in physics and in chemistry and in Shakespeare and implement and reflect all that inside him and make him reflect in a state that I'll just talk about in a minute with you, well, I can assure you, he would be a different learner. You can make reflection as a tool of learning, and I'm sure you know it better than me, the impact of this particular technique. Third quiz. What is that emotion that drives learning the most? Anybody? The emotion that drives learning the most. Ji? Joy? Love. Very nice. Well, it is excitement. It's excitement. It's excitement of the frontal cortex. The excitement produces a neurotransmitter called glutamate. I intentionally wanted you to miss this so that I can do the quiz. Play a fast one on you. Glutamate and NMDA receptors, they are the fundamental to take over the process of learning. If I'm not excited about something, I'll not learn. So, what I'm trying to show you is a whole set of techniques that you can use post-COVID, which will be my next couple of slides, which will help you now understand how the classroom has to look different if you want to deal with these people. Now, I can tell you that COVID-19 has affected us through all these mechanisms. Again, I don't want you to remember them, but there's a whole lot of things that have happened to people, and it's all written here for you. I'll not go into the details because you know these terms anyway. In particular, at a more specific cellular level, I would particularly like you to consider the phenomena of mitochondria. Now, the mitochondria is the energy producing substance in the brain. It's an organ which produces energy. What happens with COVID-19 is that it goes and kills mitochondria. That's why it paralyzes the cell and then takes over to do whatever it does. So what are you going to see in your class now? Children who are lethargic, lazy, who would respond later than usual. Their hand, after you've asked the question, is going to come up like this, even if he's on the front seat. He's going to take that much longer to process the data because the energy required for the neuron to get excited and learn is now produced by mitochondria that has been ill-affected by the COVID-19 virus. तो आप उनसे जब ये कहेंगी क्या हो गया लेजी हो गया तू तो you used to put your hand up like that, what has happened to you? This is it's like walking through mud now. His learning processes are, he knows the stuff, but it is not that quick anymore in terms of its productivity and in terms of genesis of answers. There's evidence to show what I've just said. I'm not sort of come here without evidence. This whole list of studies as recent as February 2021. And see what has happened. These are your students, particularly if they have had an exposure to COVID-19. You see this? So, where do we go from here? Few interventions. A class that is not exciting, a class where there are no experiments being set, a class where you are not throwing any challenges to the students to solve things that I was trying to do with you, throw challenges at you during this conversation of mine, ask you quizzes all the time, and ask you to think hard. And if you do not expect them to get into what is called the alpha state in class. I don't know whether it happens now, but I went to a school which is a cathedral school in Lahore, and we in every class used to have 2 minutes of what they called mindful wakefulness. So our teacher would say, heads down, please. So all of us would go like that. And she would say, just think what you have learned in the last 40 minutes. And at the end of the class, what a beautiful exercise. Coming straight out of neurobiology, she had no wisdom about neurobiology at that time. These theories weren't even there. But she knew that when you go like that and you attain a state of calmness, this is actually a neurological state in the brain where the brain starts to produce the alpha waves. So when it produces alpha waves, it learns best. However, when it produces beta waves, that is anxiety waves, it only learns to survive. So can you start doing this little exercise in the class for these children, which would give them a chance to get into the alpha state predominantly in the class, neurobiologically speaking. Mindfulness activities where they have to look and stare at an object like this probably and keep staring at it to find out a deeper meaning of this object, which may sound very silly initially to the students. क्या हो गया हमारी टीचर को, कैसी बातें कर रही है? आप उसको कह रहे हैं कि now look at this glass with water and reflect upon it. This is a mindfulness exercise. Keep looking at it for the next 2 minutes and tell me, what did you learn more about this glass that you wouldn't have learned if I just flashed it around and put it back? That's a mindfulness exercise for you to do in the class. Physical exercises in the class, not in the, largely because exercises produce more mitochondrial activity in the brain. It wakes up the mitochondria, inducts the neuron to make more mitochondria in the neurons. The previous ones have been fatigued and lost to the COVID-19 virus. But now you can make actually more through initiating certain proteins which would produce mitochondria. And then, of course, the good old nutrition. My last slide, ladies and gentlemen. The questions that I had set for myself. I think the modern day schools have to be social clubs where osmotic learning, Akbar's way of learning, osmotic learning starts to take place. You are around people who are learned, just around. More exposure of students to winners in life in schools. To come and not talk, give a 45 minutes talk and run away. Probably spend a whole day with students is an activity that you can start. Watch them dress, how they have dressed up. Watch them, how do they eat, how do they walk, what kind of things do they say, what poetry do they recite, blah, blah, blah. And that will influence, as a social club, certain degree of attitudes in those students through oxytocin and nerve growth factor, rather than noradrenaline and dopamine. Aesthetic spaces, more beautiful a setting, more learning taking place. So if you can beautify a class, it will enhance learning. Why aesthetics? Because aesthetics produce alpha waves in the brain. If you make a class uncomfortable, it will produce beta waves, poor learning. Learning how to learn. This is the role of the school, the metacognition. I think a part that is grossly missing today in schools is to run workshops on metacognition, teaching students how to learn. We do these workshops probably for the teachers a lot, but not for the students. It's time probably to start to do these exercises. And for me, the real role of modern day school is to remove barriers to learning, because brain learns anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'll be delighted to answer any questions that you may have. Yes, sir. Yes.
And generally, I see a lot of now with Instagram, there's a lot of, sort of marketing of aesthetic spaces. But I find that it's almost always from the perspective of what a grown up would find aesthetic,
So true.
right? And if you look at, I think there's a certain amount of um, communication that needs to go out to parents to flip it around and not walk through a school looking at it from the perspective of what looks slick, shiny, branded equipment, and much more to would a 5-year-old care, right? So I
Absolutely.
just wanted to make that point, get your thoughts on it, and see
Absolutely.
how other
I
schools feel
just
about it.
couldn't agree more with you. Aesthetics from the point of view of the students is the key here. How do they want it decorated? How do they want this to look different from their perspective? And you and I can assist them, give parallel thoughts. I wouldn't ask them to, just paint the whole school, this and do graffiti everywhere. That's not what schools are meant for. I can produce parallel ideas for them to consider. And then, of course, do the bit that you've just said. Couldn't agree more with you. We have a question there, probably the only question. It's running short on time.
Thank you, sir, for the enlightening insights into a lot of things. I'm Zani Shoaib. I'm from the city school. I just wanted to speak of the fact that you spoke of excitement being the major, the influencer of learning. However, if you notice two types of trainings, usually that's what trainers do, right? They tend to excite, right? And we have a lot of motivational speakers also nowadays on the arena trying to do the same, right? But if you truly look into it, what it does is I usually compare it to retail therapy because it usually lasts, 4 or 5 days maybe? Yeah, that motivational state. And then you're back to doing the norm. And usually what I see is that probably if you want to change mindsets truly when it comes to trainings, you need to reach to at a deeper level where you spoke of the osmotic levels, influencing, and maybe there's a deeper need for, relationships and understanding what it's all about, right? So what do you have to say about it? Because I feel that
You said it.
just exciting
Yes.
would not be
I'll
enough, right?
thank you very much for bringing that out. And I couldn't agree more because of the fact that excitement is actually uh, the kind of makeup that Sophia Loren does now. It can draw you to Sophia Loren yet again after all these years, but you would not like to probably stay on too long there. So it's probably icing on the cake, if I may use that term. But it's not the cake itself. The cake has to, and its ingredients have to be great for you to taste it and really enjoy the cake. But actually, to draw your attention onto that cake is very important. Who knows it better than any beautiful female sitting here? All of you are beautiful, in fact. So we do a little bit every morning to stand in front of the mirror and say, how do I look? Would I excite somebody? But we know that we do not make friends out of excitement only. The maintenance of friendship is based on the character and personality of an individual, and that's what is sustainable. So excitement is probably the triggering point, but not the lasting point of learning. If that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rana. And again, without saying a big round of applause for Dr. Rana. And I'm also going to request Christine one last time, please, to hand over the bouquet to Dr. Rana as a small gesture from Cambridge.